Good morning, boys and girls. It is so good to be back with y'all today after a wonderful Easter, a wonderful time to celebrate Holy Week. And now we are continuing on. And I am excited about these next 7 lessons together with you. We are going to journey through the 7 I am statements of Jesus. Now, what do I mean by that? There are 7 times recorded in the Gospel of John, which is where we're going to be studying. You know, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is the 4th Gospel, the Gospel of John, written by the Apostle John. And he puts in there 7 I am statements of Jesus. And those are statements that Jesus makes. I am this, and I am this, so that we can get to know Jesus better and his character. And so I'm excited to start this new journey with you. And I want to go back to where that statement, I am, began. Did you know that it began actually in Exodus? Do you remember a character named Moses? Do you remember a story that you may have heard before about the burning bush and Moses? Yes, if you go back to Exodus 3, that is where the story of Moses and the burning bush is. And if you remember, he approaches this bush that appears to be on fire, but it is not burning down. It is not consuming the tree or the bush. Instead, God's holy presence is in this bush, and he begins to talk to Moses, doesn't he? And he reveals his plan to Moses. And he says, Moses, I'm calling you out to go and free the people. Go to Pharaoh in Egypt and free my people who are enslaved, who are in bondage. And I'm using you, Moses, to do that. And so in Exodus 3, Moses hears God telling him these things. And then he asks God, well, when I go, who do I say is telling me to do this? And what does God say? He says, you tell them, I am has sent you. I am that I am. And so even back in the Old Testament, we see that term, I am. And so Jesus is now here in the New Testament. He is God in the flesh, now on this earth, going about performing miracles, sharing, healing, ministering. And he is now about to give his first I am statement, because Jesus, even though he was fully man, he was also fully God. And so he is God. And so the 7 I am statements is where we're gonna be for the next 7 times. And I'm excited about that with you. So the first thing is when Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Now I have a big loaf of yummy bread here. And I don't know about you, but I love bread. And I probably love bread a little too much, to be honest. But I remember when I was a little girl and I lived in Brazil. My parents were missionaries. And we always went by the padaria, which is the store back then when I was a kid, where it sold all the fresh bread and all the baked goodies. And we would go at certain times when we knew that these long, yummy loaves would be hot and ready. And so my dad would go in and he would buy maybe 5 or 6 or 7 of these at a time. And they would be piping hot. And my brother and I would beg, oh, can we have some? And we would ask and beg to pull some apart like I'm doing here. And we would just pull it apart like this. And I don't know about you, but there's not much better to eat, in my opinion, than a hot piece of bread with some butter on it, right? Has your mom or dad or grandma made homemade bread before? Or maybe even homemade muffins or something hot, banana bread? Oh man. So just a second. Wow, that is so good. You know, we eat bread almost on a daily basis, don't we? Excuse me. Pizza, breakfast items, cereal, dinner rolls at night, cornbread, all sorts of bread, right? And it is so good. It is so filling and so comforting, isn't it? And Jesus here is using the analogy, he's using the example of bread because everybody understood bread. Everybody ate bread. You know, back even in the Old Testament, God rained bread down to his people to feed them when they were in the wilderness. Do you remember that story? The manna that came down, and it was bread. And so even in the Old Testament, carrying through, Jesus is using that example of bread. And he's wanting to show them that he is the bread of life, right? And the story in John 6 is where this takes place, where this term bread of life is talking about. And even after he fed the 5,000 in John 6, you can go back to that story, and I hope you will, to read that story where Jesus uses a little boy in his little lunch, 2 loaves of bread and 5 little fish, and he feeds the masses. Thousands of people were fed to their full that day. It was truly a miracle, and Jesus did that. But it wasn't until after the next day when the people kept following him and asking him, and wanting to be around him and be with him, that Jesus says this, and I want to read it to you. He says, so first of all, when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "Truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. Don't work for the food that perishes, but for the food that lasts, for eternal life, which is the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal of approval on him." And then he says, Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, Moses didn't give you the bread from heaven," and he's referring to the Old Testament when manna came down, "but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." Then they said, "Sir, give us this bread always." And that's when he says in verse 35 of John 6, "I am the bread of life. No one who comes to me will ever be hungry, and no one who believes in me will ever be thirsty again." And so he's saying here that nothing will fill them for eternity except him. He is the filler of our souls. We can eat bread and fill our tummies for a little while, right? But what he's saying is for eternity, he is the filler. He will fill us up and make us whole, make us filled. And so we can know that Jesus is the bread of life, of eternal life, right? So as you eat bread, as you look at bread, as you make bread, think about that, that only Jesus can satisfy. That's what he's saying here. So as we go about our day-to-day, I want us to think about that. I want us to dwell on that. Whenever you eat a piece of bread, give thanks to God, and also give thanks that he is the filler of your soul, that he fills you up and makes you full and content and joyful. I love you guys. I hope y'all have a great day, and I'll look forward to tomorrow for our second I am statement of Jesus. See you later.